It is common knowledge and a statistic that persons from low-income backgrounds are found to be the majority when it comes to the criminal justice system. Our next guest, currently serving as the youngest director in the Bronx Defenders as she works to uplift community voices in policy discourse surrounding social injustice issues in the Bronx. And she also leads community discussions, advocacy days, and public education events for Bronxites. We're pleased to have the Interdisciplinary Policy Director at the Bronx Defenders, Brittany A. McCoy. And Brittany, good to have you.
Good. Thank you so much to be here.
And congratulations to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So you are actually the youngest in your area of working and writing policy. Talk to us about your new position.
Yes. So it is new, less than a month old. So I got promoted maybe about 3 weeks ago, and I was a policy associate before that. And my focus is on all of the issues that we work on in the office. So we have the criminal legal system, we don't say justice system. We have the family regulation system because we don't say ACS. We also have immigration, and then we have our civil action practice, which focuses on housing and other employment law issues. So I work across the board, even though my niche is kind of in the criminal legal system.
And when we talk about really the criminal legal system, we know that when it comes to communities of color, as I said in the intro, that we find ourselves predominantly on the other end of that courtroom.
Yes.
And it's something that has to be rectified.
Yes.
So when we talk about the policy work and what really needs to be done, what sticks out for you?
Yeah, so what sticks out for me is just knowing the history of how our laws were made and who makes the laws. So when I looked around and when I got into this work really young, I was 16 years old, I understood that there were a lot of people writing laws for people in my community who didn't look like me, who didn't come from the backgrounds of my background, or who just didn't understand what living in a neighborhood like mine looked like. And there was legislation being made that directly impacted young people, just people from low-income backgrounds or any other marginalized community that you can think about, but there weren't enough voices in the space speaking to the direct issues that were going on. And when policy is legislated in those manners, it's really difficult when you're trying to enforce that policy or just speaking about the people who that policy is going to directly impact. So I wanted to be one of the people in those rooms and speaking when those things are not being talked about.
You know, there's often that saying, right? I want a seat at the table, right?
Right.
But it's not just important just to have a seat at the table. You want to have a voice at the table, right?
Right.
And so talk to me for yourself about what it feels like, not just being a seat at the table, because now your voice at the table, because you're talking about policy, we're talking about change.
Right. So I would always tell people, you know, they say you want a seat at the table. Shirley Chisholm has a great quote about that. Like if they don't give you a seat at the table, like you bring a folding chair. I also tell people to make your own table, right? These spaces were not created for us. These spaces were not created for people who look like me. So coming to that table and knowing that I have a very different perspective from what usual policy legislators look like, especially at the time when I started. Now it's a little bit more different, it's a little bit more diverse, which is great, but it is often, you know, difficult sometimes to speak up. Well, I wouldn't even say difficult to speak up in those spaces, but it can be challenging. It can be challenging, but also empowering to be one of the only voices in that room, trying to ensure that, you know, I never say I'm a voice for the voiceless or anything of that nature, because I think that people have their own voices. I want to make sure I'm lifting people up into those spaces, and I remember that every time I come to those tables.
From your perspective, give me this. You're a young lady who's really working on the front lines and really doing advocacy and making your voice heard. The truth be told, congratulations. I know you've worked on the Hill before, too, as an intern, and you've had the opportunity to work on Capitol Hill. But when I cover Capitol Hill and I walk through Capitol Hill, I find most of the time those persons that are working with a lot of our legislators are young.
Yes.
They don't always get the press. It's usually the senior guy that's sitting in the back sometimes.
Right.
But many times it's a lot of youthful advisement that goes on in the area of that. How much was that an inspiration to you to come back and say, listen, you know, if they're doing it in Washington, I can do it right here in my own neighborhood?
Right. It was a big inspiration because that was one of the only spaces outside of me going to a historically black college. I went to Virginia State University, which really shaped who I am as an individual outside of being from the Bronx. And it was inspiring to see young people who really wanted to make sure that their voices were heard and make sure that the voices of their communities were heard. And a lot of times in this political space or in the activism space, you're often told you're too young to wait your turn. Somebody else may be in line. And that told me, you know, there's never the right time. You're never too young. You always have the opportunity to make that change, and you should take that initiative and don't let other people tell you no, especially if you know you're called to do something. So I wanted to bring that back to my neighborhood.
Yeah, I remember my friend Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley
I
talking
love
about
her.
that. Yeah,
Yes.
she talks about they said it wasn't my time, but it's my turn.
Right.
And ultimately,
Yes.
she ends up with a seat in the Congress. For yourself, when you look at the needs of the community and the work that you're doing right now, if you had to give priority to some things, what would be some of the top priorities that you see really that we really need to be putting our eyes and our ears and our voice to?
Right. I would definitely say young people and resources. Young people, especially, I know, like I said, I grew up born and raised in the Bronx, and there are a lot of issues that happen within the Bronx, right? And I think a lot of it comes down to the resources that the Bronx has. And we are often the most underfunded, under-resourced community in the nation. And that's not by, any mistake, So I want to make sure that we're giving resources to the students and the kids that really need that so that they're able to go down a different direction, a different path. I know a lot of young people who want to be able to do better things and different things with their lives, but they don't have the resources or the tools that they need around them to be able to be successful. They often feel like they're over-policed, they're over-punished, they're not given the grace that other neighborhoods or other students would be given. And when they do make a mistake, they're often, again, over-criminalized, over-punished, and aren't able to recover because of the way in which the system is made. So I want to make sure that we're investing in our young people, may it be after-school programs, if it's better school systems, if it is, our education system in general, giving young people something to be able to look forward to, rather than saying that, you're a byproduct of this environment, so you only deserve these things.
As a young person yourself, you're sitting at the table talking to people, making your voice heard. What's that like? Because many times people say, okay, well, you ain't been around here for a minute.
Right.
Right? That's
yes, it is, yes.
And I think it's so unfair.
Yeah.
Because I think that in many times the experiences of this generation far surpass some of the things that many of us have ever had to deal with or been through.
Right.
Mass shootings,
right.
things such as
yes.
that. So we don't discount that. We don't discredit that. But
right.
what's that like for you? What are you being told when you're there about your voice?
I mean, I've had a lot of upliftment since I was very young, but I've also had the naysayers, right? I've had the people from when I was young, from when I was 16, who would believe that, you had to be older to be able to do this work, or you have to get another degree, you have to be in another position, you have to be at another level to be able to have that seat at the table. And I tell this to my mentees the same way that I tell people that are in my community. You bring yourself and who you are, and that's your voice. And that's what I always try to make sure I show up and do, because I want somebody else to see me and say, you know what, Brittany did it, and she's from where I'm from. She looks like me. Since she was able to do it, I'm able to do it too. So I always remember that. I don't let people's negative opinions or negative, mindsets about what age may look like or what leadership may look like, right? Because it wasn't designed to be like me anyway, so I can't fit into that box of what other people may think.
Right. When we talk about social justice, particularly in the African American community, communities of color, how do you define social justice from your perspective?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's so many different angles when you're talking about social justice, right? A lot of people focus on the police brutality aspect of it, but I also focus on the resource aspect of it, right? A lot of what happens in the criminal legal system when you're talking about people who may commit crimes or maybe accused of doing certain things, it all boils down to resources. When you look at the places that are the least, have the least amount of resources, that's where the most crime happens. So I want to make sure that we're investing in our communities. Investing meaning that we put a lot of money towards police departments and, the NYPD and all those other things. But essentially, those things aren't necessarily making our community safer. What I believe is going to make our community safer is real investment, especially in young people, so that people have something to do outside of allegedly committing crimes. I tell people all the time, I don't know people who wake up in the morning who say they want to do something bad because it's fun or because it feels good. You have people who have very extenuating circumstances who often get themselves allegedly caught up in situations that they don't want to be or shouldn't be in because of a path that they felt like they had to go down. And I think that also needs to be considered as to why people do those things. So I want to make sure that we're investing in that why and investing in giving people better opportunities rather than that.
We'll talk about criminal justice. Let's hang out there for a minute because, that's a big issue.
Yes.
And we talk about right here in the Bronx, Rikers Island, right?
Right.
Give me your thoughts. What do you think about Rikers Island?
I mean, Rikers Island is inhumane. It is a place that people are supposed to go to wait to go to trial, right? Like they're not supposed to serve out a sentence there or anything of that nature unless it's under 1 year, if I'm not mistaken. And we have to talk about the inhumanity of Rikers Island and what it looks like. I don't know if you've ever been to visit Rikers Island. I've been to visit in 2019 in November, right before the pandemic hit. And it was one of the most traumatizing experiences of my life. And I was only there for a few hours. So you can only imagine what people who are forced to be there have to go through on a day-to-day basis. We see the videos that come out. We hear the stories from the people who are forced to stay there, and we can't turn a blind eye to that, right? When we talk about injustices going on in communities outside of this nation, right? When we talk about other countries, they're often looked bad upon for those things, but we have those same things happening within our own community in the Bronx. And we can't continue to say, well, those people deserve to be there because they did this thing. Most of the people who are waiting at Rikers are waiting, to see a judge. They haven't even been convicted of anything. So it's inhumane to have people sitting, in such conditions for so long, regardless of what the nature of what they're being accused of. And we can't treat people in that way.
Yeah, you can't treat people like that. And I mean, too many times we hear too many stories that are coming out of that. Let me
Right.
take you from that, right? So you go to Rikers Island. Let's just play a hypothetical. You go out to Rikers Island, you have this experience. You understand this experience is horrific. Now your job is to go out and organize a community, to let them know. Talk to me about that community-based organization that you do, because that's a part of what you do. There's the policy side, right?
Yes.
Which we got to work on changing
Yes.
the law. But then you also need some change agitators.
Yes.
And you need
Yes.
the community to be the change agitators.
Right.
Walk me through from your perspective, what's that like for you getting involved in the community, or making them aware of the issue, because sometimes they're not even as aware
Yes.
or for this show woke as they
Yes.
should be, right?
Yes.
So how do you wake people up is the question.
Yes. So I always start with the basic facts, right? At the end of the day, I understand that no community is a monolith, right? Everybody has a difference of opinions on what they may have seen, regardless of, what the news may tell you, what social media may tell you. I start off with the basic facts of the nature of what's going on. And we have discussions. We have discussions that are very passionate about what people may believe, should happen, or how it is that we should get things done, and we strategize, right? So there's different ways to, be an agitator, right? I said everybody has a role in this movement. Your role may not be to be front lines at a protest. Your role may be to write an op-ed. Your role may be to write a letter to the editor. Your role may be to be a photographer. We figure out what people's role is when you're strategizing around it. And we get people to make noise. We get people to move on something. So if that looks like a protest, and getting people in a space where they want to lift their voices up, if it's a rally or if it's something of that nature, we talk about what the direct issue is, what it is that we want to see change, and then how do we want to change it. Is this a legislative issue? Are we calling an elected official to action? Are we just saying we want more attention on this issue so that the other actors can make sure that they're paying attention to it? So we figure out what that strategy looks like and what that process looks like. And it also comes with a public education piece, right? Sometimes I think that's missing. Because you have to be educated and educate your community members on what's going on. I always tell people I don't want the me's. And what I mean by that is I have a lot of direct access to these spaces because I sought them out, because I wanted to be in this field of work. The people who are the most directly impacted often aren't seeking out this field of work because they don't believe that this system works for them. So they don't want anything to do with it. So we start from that place of like a public education piece of what is actually transpiring, and then we move over to the organizing phase of things.
There's two sides to this thing. You have the piece where you're doing the organizing, and then you also have that advocacy piece, right?
Yes.
You have the piece and you do both, because
Yes,
right on one
yes.
side there is, I got to get the public woke, and we have
Yeah.
to make it woke. And then also I sit at the table, and I sit at the table to be able to create policy and make those and make those changes. Which one do you enjoy better?
I do both. I love both. I can't say I enjoy one better than the other because I love being around the community. I love being around my people. I love being around, the energy that brings. When you're in the policy space, the elected space, a lot of times you're around just a lot of I don't want to say gruesome work, but it's tough work. It's a lot of putting pen to paper. It's a lot of meetings. It's a lot of panels. It's a lot of boardroom stuff. And I love the action that comes with kind of both of it. So I wouldn't take away one for the other because I know that both are needed, right? I always say that we can protest all day, but we have to change the laws. And we can write laws all day, but we have to make sure that those laws are enforced. So I don't believe you can have one without the other.
When I bring up the word impact litigation, what does that mean to you?
Impact litigation, just making sure that, we have an impact litigation practice at the Bronx Defenders also, but making sure that litigation or whatever that legislation looks like that comes with like suing, like in many instances, which is not something that I deal with. I'm more on the policy side, even though it does intersect. But that impact work, it focuses a lot on, how do I say this, what we can't do when we legislate. So sometimes the court does have to come into practice. So I look at it more so as like a legal court system way of dealing with things.
And when we talk about the court system and you go in there and you see a majority of people, community of color, and they're pretty much dealing, whether it's housing court, whether it's court, because we did say, like, most of the time we talk about the court system, the first thing people think about many times is criminal justice, but the reality is you got a housing court over there.
Right,
And you got a housing court over there that sees a lot of people who look like us, and the needs are great.
Right.
So how does it feel for you, first of all, seeing so many people who look like us in that housing sphere, in the court system, and what can we do about better regulating this thing called housing that we're dealing with so many times here in our area? Because these big cities that we call ourselves, right, the New Yorks, the Los Angeles, this, that, third, we're really seeing gentrification at a high level.
Right. Yeah, I think the biggest part is one, calling a thing, right? Sometimes people are afraid to just call it what it is, and you have to start there. And I'm a big supporter of bringing attention to an issue. So when you bring the organizers around, when you bring the community around, and you actually allow them to see what happens in criminal court, in housing court, in all of these courts, right? People are enraged. People are upset because they see all of the injustices with their actual own eyes. So I would say that's one of the biggest pieces, is making sure that people are present to actually see what's going on. And then you move to the strategy phase, right? We see it, now what do we want to do about it? Do we want to call our legislators and ask them to act on a bill? Do we want to call them and say we need greater enforcement going on? What is the actual goal that we're trying to rectify, and then go from that point? Yeah.
Housing, as you see it right now, how much of a big issue are you tackling in your field with people who are saying, listen, we need help?
I'm more focused on the criminal legal part of it, but we are seeing a lot of it all works in a holistic manner, and that's what kind of my role as Interdisciplinary Policy Director is. I see it from a very broad vantage point. So there are times where you can have a legal case, and that then trickles down to a housing case, and that can then trickle down to you losing your housing because of something that you haven't even been convicted of. So we see a lot of those things happening, and also across with the family regulation system and with the immigration system as well. So it all works in a holistic nature, and I think it's important for people to know that none of these systems work in silos. They all work on behalf of each other, intertwined with each other.
Yeah. Federal versus state versus city. There's a lot of layers to that. Given the fact that you've had some experience in all of them, is there an easier one to navigate when it comes to laws?
I would say maybe state and local is a little bit easier than federal, because there's so many different actors on the federal space, because you're working in a national sense, right? And I think if people are looking to get involved in something, I would always tell people to get involved on your local level. A lot of times people are looking for instant gratification within these things, which I understand. And it wasn't until I got into the field where I realized it didn't work like that. So if you're looking for more of a surefire way to be able to get really involved and see quick changes, the local level is a place where you can try to build that up. And it's really empowering for people to be able to see, something like, okay, there's a pothole on my block that I really want to fix, right? It may not be anything criminal, legal, or whatever the case is, but that's a quality of life issue. You're able to focus on those issues as well. So I would really encourage people to get involved on the state and local level, because there's so many different changes that you can make in your community just on that level alone. We often look at the president and Congress and say, you guys are not doing anything, you need to fix my community. And it may be something that is better suited for the state and local level because they don't have jurisdiction over that.
Yeah. I want to, in our time, the little remaining time we have left, talk a little bit about this. Gen Zers, right? You got Gen Zers, you got millennials, very active sometimes in organizing and really taking to the streets and advocacy. But yet and still, we can see some more involvement, right?
Yes, absolutely.
What would you say to those persons about being involved at such a young age? Because the fact is, sometimes they say, listen, my voice doesn't matter. But now we do see, in the age of iPhones and technology, people are becoming their own bloggers, they're becoming their own voice, they're becoming their own, editor-in-chief, if you will.
Yeah.
we'll speak to that and talk about the power of being able to have a young voice out there.
Yeah, so I'm kind of on the cusp. I don't know if I'm Gen Z or a millennial because I'm right there.
Right.
But I make that joke and talk about that a lot because there is also like a stigma where people feel, you know, when you're younger, you can't talk or you don't have a voice, or people may try to, you know, put that into you. And I always tell people that as a young person, your voice absolutely matters. If it didn't matter, they wouldn't try to stifle it, right? So you scream at the top of your lungs, you be as loud as you possibly can be, you use TikTok, you use Instagram, whatever your mediums are, you reach out to your friends, you reach out to your communities. If you have an issue, you talk about it. Don't allow anyone to silence what it is that you have to say, because what you have to say matters. So whatever it is that you feel like you want to discuss or talk about, make sure that you're getting that out. Don't allow people to make you feel that because you're younger, your voice in the space doesn't matter. You have experiences just like other people. There are certain things that young people can speak to that people who may be a little bit older than us don't have the experience in, because we're coming from two different generations. So it's always empowering. And I always want to empower young people to lift your voices up no matter what people say.
Legislative priorities we should be keeping our eyes on right now?
I will always say the criminal legal system, just making sure that we're investing resources in our community. Like, resources are always going to be the #1 thing, because that's going to get us from the point that we're at right now to the next point.
Yeah, and when we look at the criminal legal system, obviously a lot of reform has taken place. We've seen the issue with bail reform, right? A lot of people are saying right now that bail reform, although it's a good in terms of the as a whole. What we're seeing right now in some ways is there's some holes in that system that really need to be readdressed. Agree, disagree?
I wouldn't agree necessarily, because when you're looking at bail reform, and again, it also starts from the facts of the matter of what does bail mean, right? So in our criminal legal system, we're told that we are innocent until proven guilty, but that only actually happens if you are capable of paying bail, if you are at a certain income range where you're able to fight your case from the outside, right? So when you have people who are in the top 1% or just have discretionary income, right, that they're able to use to be able to pay for bail to where they don't have to fight on the inside of some place like Rikers, we see the direct impact that that has on their case. And again, they are not proven guilty of anything at that point. So if we're going to talk about something that is constitutionally available to people, we can't say that we're going to take those constitutional rights away because of an arbitrary, you know, whatever opinion it is that we have about mostly what people from the Bronx or low-income people are able to afford or have access to. It has to be across the board.
I remember we started talking earlier. You said you went to Rikers Island, had that visit. Talk to me about, just before we go, what did you see?
I saw a lot of young people, to be completely honest. I saw cells. I saw where people were being held at. I saw just like what the bathrooms looked like. I saw what some of the areas in which people were like doing recreational activities looked like. And it just didn't look like a place that was the most humane place to be in. It wasn't the most sanitary. It wasn't, you know, we even saw like the law library and things of that nature where people were able to go and like, you know, study on their case and things of that nature. And it just didn't feel like a fun place to be in, right? I know, like, of course, prison is not, or jail is not supposed to feel fun per se, but you felt confined. You felt like you didn't have an escape out. You didn't feel like this was somewhere that you wanted to be. And you can tell that by, you know, many of the people that we spoke to or who wanted to speak to us and maybe didn't have the opportunity to, that people felt like they were hopeless and they didn't have any way out.
Yeah. Rikers Island is certainly a story that we continue to follow here on
Yes.
the Social Justice Forums. I want to say thank you, Brittany,
Thank
for taking
you.
the time to talk a little bit about this work. And I think it's a very important work. And thank you for already making it your life's passion, right?
Thank you.
And so thank you for
Yes.
being with us. Brittany A. McCoy, our guest.